Have you ever heard that saying, the darker the night, the brighter the stars?
Yeah.
It's kind of like when things are tough, the people who really shine, they really stand out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's true. And it's a lot like what we're looking at today.
Right.
We're going deep on a pretty rough time for the Israelites, the time of the judges.
Yeah. And in all that chaos, we find these two amazing people, Samuel and Ruth. And when you read about the judges, it's like constant ups and downs.
Yeah, total instability.
Yeah, the people would ditch their faith, face the consequences, then beg for help.
Right.
And then what do?
Back to square one.
They backslide. It's a rough chapter, for sure.
It was a dark time.
Yeah.
Spiritually, they were adrift. Really no strong leadership to speak of.
And that's what makes Samuel and Ruth so inspiring.
Absolutely. They're like these bright lights shining in all that darkness.
So we've got these excerpts from a lesson all about Samuel and Ruth.
Okay.
And what we're trying to figure out for you listening is how they managed to be so strong during such a messed up time.
Yeah, their faith, their leadership, it's incredible.
Exactly. What can we learn from them that still applies to us today,
It's not just about the stories themselves.
Right.
It's about why their choices mattered so much back then and what that means for us now.
Okay, so let's start with Samuel. The lesson calls him the last judge of Israel.
Right.
But he was different from the others in some pretty big ways.
Yeah, right away, you see, he's not your typical judge.
So what were some of those big differences for you?
Well, for one, he wasn't just a warrior like a lot of the earlier judges who were basically military leaders,
Yeah, just there to deal with one specific threat.
Exactly. Samuel helped deliver Israel from the Philistines, but he wasn't really a general in that sense. He was more of a judicial judge, resolving disputes, offering guidance legally and spiritually.
I see.
He was also a priest and a prophet.
Whoa, so he was wearing a lot of hats.
Seriously, he was like 3 key leaders rolled into one.
That's wild. And the lesson makes it clear that he was a national leader too, right?
Oh, yeah. A huge difference from the earlier judges who were more local figures.
Right. And his devotion to the Lord was like rock solid his whole life.
Yeah, that's a big one. You don't always see that with the other judges.
So true. And you see that early on, don't you?
Oh, yeah. 1 Samuel chapter 2 talks about him ministering to the Lord as a kid.
Wow.
Then verses 21 and 26, we talk about how he continued to grow in the presence of the Lord and in favor with both God and man.
That phrase, grew in the presence of the Lord, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
Definitely.
It's like his spiritual growth wasn't happening in a vacuum,
Right.
It was happening right there in the tabernacle, the place of worship.
Yeah, that connection was key for him.
It shows how important that relationship with God was to his whole life.
Totally. And think about it, that connection to something bigger than yourself that's important for anyone in a leadership position, even today.
So true. Then, in 1 Samuel 3 and 4, the lesson points out that the Lord was with him. And get this, none of his wants fell to the ground. Right. And it says that all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was established as a prophet of the Lord.
Wow.
How would everyone in Israel have known that?
Think about it.
This is before the internet, before TV even.
That's the thing.
Right.
When his prophecies kept coming true, people saw God's hand on his life.
They couldn't deny it.
Exactly. None of his words fall to the ground. That's a statement about his authority and the accuracy of his messages.
And for you listening, think about how that consistency would affect any leader.
Totally. People would trust him completely.
Yeah, it wasn't just local gossip. Everyone knew who Samuel was and what he was about.
Exactly.
Then in 1 Samuel 7, it says that the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel, and that they had peace with the Amorites.
Interesting.
It also goes into his role as judge for all of Israel his whole life, and how he would travel around to Bethel, Gilgal, Mizpah, and then back home to Ramah, where he built an altar.
Right.
And the lesson makes us think about whether he built altars in those other cities, too.
What do you think?
I mean, he was a priest on top of everything else.
Yeah, and his travels probably involved leading worship and sharing God's word.
So yeah, I think it's likely he set up places for worship in those other cities too.
Makes sense.
Now, about that peace with the Philistines and the Amorites, the lesson asks if it was mainly because of Samuel's diplomacy, or was it divine intervention, the hand of the Lord?
Well, the text says the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines, pretty clearly.
Right.
So it seems like God was directly involved in pushing back their attacks.
Yeah. I mean, Samuel's leadership, his spiritual authority, all of that was important.
For sure.
But it sounds like God was the one who ultimately brought peace to Israel during that time.
Yeah, it wasn't just human effort or military might.
It's amazing how Samuel was all three: prophet, priest, and judge all at the same time.
It's pretty unique.
The lesson says a prophet was God's spokesperson, sometimes called a seer.
Right.
And they got messages through dreams and visions.
Mhm.
And since Samuel was from the tribe of Levi, he became the priest for Israel after Eli died.
That's a lot of power in one person.
Right. It's like spiritual and civic authority all rolled into one.
And remember, this was a time of chaos and uncertainty.
Yeah, people were looking for guidance.
And Samuel was that central figure.
Totally.
He spoke God's word, mediated between God and the people, and offered guidance for the whole nation.
It's no wonder he was able to steer Israel away from all that back and forth sin and judgment they were stuck in.
No.
Okay, so Samuel was this like pivotal leader who brought stability and spiritual direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now let's talk about Ruth.
Right.
She's introduced as a Moabite woman, a Gentile,
All right.
who also shines as a bright light. The lesson even gives us the Hebrew and Latin words for non-Israelite goy and gentilis.
Oh, yeah.
Why is it such a big deal that she's a Gentile in this story?
It's really remarkable when you think about it. Here's someone outside the covenant community you know.
Yeah.
But she ends up playing a crucial role in Israel's history. It shows you that God's grace goes beyond national boundaries.
Wow.
He had a specific covenant with Israel, but it's like he's hinting at his plans for all people.
That's powerful.
It challenges any narrow idea of who God can work through.
So the story starts with a famine in the land during the time of the judges.
Right.
And Elimelech and his family have to move from Bethlehem in Judah to Moab. And then things take a turn for the worse.
Yeah. Elimelech dies, and then his two sons, who had married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth.
Leaving Naomi, Elimelech's widow, with just her two daughters-in-law.
It's a heartbreaking situation.
Absolutely. And then Naomi decides to go back to Judah after hearing that the Lord had visited his people and ended the famine.
Right. A turning point in the story.
Totally. She tells Ruth and Orpah to go back to their families in Moab.
Yeah, she knew how vulnerable women were without male support.
Especially back then.
Totally. And she hoped they'd find security, rest, maybe even remarry within their own culture.
And that's where you see the huge difference between Orpah and Ruth.
Yeah, Orpah goes back to her people and her gods.
But Ruth makes that incredible statement, "Your people shall be my people, and your God my God."
Wow.
It's amazing to think about a Gentile choosing to follow the Lord.
Yeah. The lesson even connects it to other Gentiles like Rahab and Caleb's family, who also followed Yahweh.
It shows how deep her commitment was.
Absolutely. It's more than just loyalty to her mother-in-law.
Right.
It's a complete shift in her identity.
It's like she's not just moving, she's embracing a whole new way of life.
Exactly, including Naomi's God.
And remember, the lesson points out that Moabite worship involved Shemosh and even human sacrifice.
Oh, yeah.
Ruth was leaving all that behind.
It's a radical conversion, a total rejection of everything she grew up with.
It really highlights the depth of her faith.
Totally. She's willing to leave behind everything familiar.
So the lesson introduces this concept of levirate marriage, which was practiced in Canaan and later became part of Mosaic law.
Right.
For those listening, can you explain what that was all about and how it connects to Ruth's story?
Sure. Levirate marriage. It's related to the Latin word for brother-in-law.
Interesting.
It was a custom where if a husband died without having a son, his brother was supposed to marry the widow.
Okay.
The main idea was to make sure the dead man's family line and inheritance continued.
I see.
So the first son from that marriage would be considered the legal heir of the dead brother.
So his name and his family's land would be protected?
Exactly. It was super important for keeping family inheritance intact as a sign of God's faithfulness in giving them the land in the first place.
And there was also the law of land redemption,
Right.
where if an Israelite became poor and had to sell their land, they or a close relative could buy it back to keep it in the family.
Yeah, so how does Ruth, this Moabite widow, fit into all of this?
Right. She's not even an Israelite.
Well, Ruth's story is a beautiful example of how these laws could work together and how God's plan could unfold through them.
I'm listening.
So Ruth and Naomi come back to Bethlehem with nothing, and Ruth starts gathering leftover grain in the fields to provide for them. And guess where she ends up?
Where?
In the fields of Boaz, a wealthy relative of Elimelech and a faithful man.
Wow.
It wasn't just a coincidence. The story makes it clear that God was at work.
Right?
Boaz sees how hardworking and loyal Ruth is to Naomi.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. Neither Boaz nor the other closer relative was actually required to marry Ruth according to levirate marriage.
Because they weren't Milan's brothers.
Exactly.
But the lesson says that Naomi needing to sell their land because they were so poor,
Right.
that brought the whole issue of land redemption and marriage to the forefront.
Totally. If the land was going to be redeemed by a relative, it made sense for that relative to also take care of Naomi and continue Elimelech's family by marrying Ruth.
That makes sense.
So the closest relative was initially willing to redeem the land.
Okay.
But then he realized that meant marrying Ruth and potentially messing up his own inheritance with any kids they might have.
Oh, I see.
So he backed out. But Boaz, he saw Ruth's character and felt a responsibility to his relative's family and to Naomi.
So he stepped up.
He agreed to both buy back the land and marry Ruth.
That's amazing. And so he redeems Elimelech's land, basically giving it back to Naomi's family.
Right.
Then he marries Ruth, and they have a son named Obed.
And the lesson points out that Obed means one who serves.
How fitting.
Right. Just like Ruth faithfully served Naomi.
And Obed becomes the legal heir to the land, continuing Elimelech's family line.
Exactly. And this is where the story becomes even more important in the grand scheme of Israel's history.
Okay.
The genealogy in Ruth chapter 4 tells us that Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King David.
Oh, no. Wow.
Ruth, this Moabite woman who chose the God of Israel, becomes a direct ancestor of Israel's greatest king.
That's incredible.
It fulfills that prophecy about a ruler coming from Judah.
Wow.
It's a powerful example of God's grace reaching unexpected people.
Totally.
And how faithfulness, even in small things, can have huge consequences.
It really drives home the point, doesn't it?
It does.
Even during those dark times of the judges, God was working.
Yeah.
Preserving faithful people and setting the stage for amazing things in Israel's future.
Absolutely.
Samuel, with his leadership and devotion, helped break the cycle of sin.
And Ruth, with her loyalty and courage, chose a new faith and became a vital link in the line of a king.
They were truly beacons of hope in a dark time.
They were, and their stories are powerful reminders for us.
Right.
They show us that faithfulness, integrity, and courage can shine even when everything around us is falling apart.
Yeah.
Their lives teach us that even seemingly small choices based on faith and loyalty can have an impact we might not even imagine.
So, as you think about this deep dive into the lives of Samuel and Ruth, let's go back to that saying, the darker the night, the brighter the stars.
Okay.
Think about the choices they made, Samuel's constant devotion from a young age, Ruth's unwavering loyalty, and her decision to follow a God she didn't grow up with.
Powerful.
How can your own small acts of faithfulness shine in the tough times?
That's a good question.
And how might they contribute to a legacy you haven't even thought of yet?
It's worth considering.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.